Welcome, everyone, to Behind the Story, the Bird Story Agency podcast, where we go beyond the published article to discover how great journalism happens. I'm your host, and today we're joined by Ethiopian journalist Ayele Addis Ambelu, whose reporting follows one of Africa's most ambitious industrial journeys, from cotton fields in Ethiopia's Afar region all the way to textile factories and export markets. Rather than looking at cotton simply as an agricultural crop, Ayele explores what it takes to build an entire value chain that creates jobs, supports industry, and keeps more value on the continent. So, today we talk about behind the story, the people he met along the way, and what surprised him most. Welcome, Ayele.
Hello.
Ayele, your story takes readers from a cotton field in Ethiopia's Afar region to textile factories and export markets. When you first started reporting, what story did you think you were telling, and how did that change as you began to dig?
Initially, I thought I was writing a story about cotton production, but as I traveled and interviewed people across the sector, I realized the story was much bigger than agriculture. It became a story about industrial transformation. I discovered that every bale of cotton represents a chain of opportunities. A farmer grows it, researchers improve it, factories process it, garments workers manufactures products from it, and exporters connect it to international market. So the story evolved from being about a crop into being about how one agriculture product could drive industrial development, job creation, and regional trade across Africa. Similarly, I believed I was writing a story about Ethiopia's textile industry. However, once I traveled to the cotton growing area and began speaking with farmers, I realized that this was actually a story about connections. It became a story about how one cotton ball traveled from a farmer's field through research institution, engineers, spinning mills, weaving factories, and garment manufacturers before reaching consumers. That completely changed my reporting approach. Instead of focusing only on industrial policy, I followed the cotton itself. The value chain became the story.
It's a really interesting story. And you spoke to farmers, researchers, manufacturers, government officials, ministers, industry leaders. Why was it so important for you to speak to all of these people rather than just to speak to one person?
Yeah, thank you, Paula. It's a good question. Of course, as a journalist, so single source is not credible. It needs to a multi-source approach, and cross-checking, fact-checking is important. Why interview everyone? That's the question. So, because no single person sees the whole picture. A farmer understands rainfall. A farmer understands production. Researchers understand technology. Researcher understand consent. So a manufacturer understands quality and government understands policy. Similarly, and investors understands markets. Each interview answered only one part of the puzzle. Only when you combine this perspective, we have to like begin understand why Ethiopia has tremendous potential, but still a struggle to complete the value chain. So this is something I always also share my experience that complex story has multiple stakeholders and good reporting requires listening to all of them and compiling multiple sources.
Was there any interview that changed what you thought, that surprised you?
Yeah, the interview with the commercial farmer in Afar, he had access to about 1,000 hectares, but he was cultivating only around 180 hectares. The limitation was not land. So it wasn't willingness. It was the limitation was improved seed. That completely changed my understanding. Before that interview, I assumed production constraints were mainly about climate or investment. Instead, I learned that research already exists, but improved varieties are not reaching farmers. That was a major insight. The biggest surprise when I interviewed different stakeholders, I found that probably hearing manufacturers say the other surprise, manufacturers say that our first choice is Ethiopian cotton. Many people assume factories simply prefer imports. That wasn't true. That wasn't true. Manufacturers actually wanted domestic cotton. The problem was not willingness, it was consistency, quality, volume, reliability. That shifted my perspective completely.
The really nice thing about your story is that it tackles complex issues like industrial policy and manufacturing and agriculture and trade, yet it was very accessible. So, when you're writing such a complicated subject, how do you turn it into a story that people actually want to read?
Yeah, of course, I'm your student also in different fellowship program, and I learned from you different experiences. I really loved the Fry College media and expertise model. That is what I implemented. How did we make, as a journalist, complex topics more readable and attract our audiences and viewers? I always ask one question: what happened to one piece of cotton? Once I followed one bale of cotton from the farm to the factory, the story became much easier. Readers do not need to understand industrial policy first; they understand journeys. So I organized the reporting around the physical movement of cotton that allowed economic concepts to emerge naturally through people's experience, making a technical story readable and also attractive audience. So I always ask, what does this policy mean for one person, not for the whole? Policy is a consolidated document or a promise of a government. It's not like an implemented one, but the policy implementation measures through a single person's life. So instead of beginning with industrial parks, I began with Yosef, that is a farmer who live in Afar. So readers care about people's first, then the economics follow naturally. So complex subjects become easier when readers or viewers or listeners follow one human story.
Absolutely, and I like the way it starts with Yosef and then ends with Yosef. Also, at a real kind of a full journey. Not everything makes it into the final story, and your story was so rich and so detailed. I'm wondering if there's a scene or an interview or a detail that you had to leave out, and that you wish that you could still have kept in because it helped you understand the bigger picture.
Yeah, the biggest lesson I expected Ethiopia's biggest challenge to be manufacturing. Instead, I discovered the factories already exist, industrial parks exist, investors are there, demands all of the market needs. So the weakest link is connecting agriculture with manufacturing. That surprised me. The value chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Ethiopia doesn't have a cotton problem. It has a coordination problem. The land exists, researchers exist, factories are there, markets are also available, but the links between them are weak. That becomes the central finding and the biggest lesson.
Yella, there was a lot of information in your story, and I'm wondering when you were putting everything together, how did you not get overwhelmed by so much detail?
Yeah, what didn't make the story it's a very um, complicated, a very difficult question, but the amount of hope. Farmers were not simply complaining. where all of the Ethiopian media, especially in the related to when I did the research, after you give me assignment to do this story, I try to assess how the Ethiopian media reports and my experiences about the cotton. There are reports on complaints of farmers, the shortage of fertilizers, shortage of improved seeds, and uh, losing market connections and brokers' challenge. The farmers were not simply complaining here. Researchers were not complaining. Manufacturers were not complaining. Everyone believed Ethiopia could succeed. Their frustration was that they all wanted the same outcome, but coordination remained weak. That optimism was one of the strongest impressions I took away. There were many fascinating conversations about seed research, water management, cotton grading, regional logistics, export documentation, and trade policies with African free trade policy, free market policies, and trade corridors from East Africa to South Africa, from East Africa to East Africa. Those topics deserved separate stories. In fact, thank you, Paula. You recognize some exactly that they pay some stories, additional feature in the future. That's really encouraging us. And also, not only this story is limited in one medium language, we are also translating in multi different languages in Ethiopian local media and broadcasted in radio, different web media, social media, and television stations. They are very happy to do that. So it's good for us, not only the remaining subjects or the remaining issues or agendas regarding to cotton needs requires much work.
Ayele, if you were coming back to the story in 5 years' time, what would you want to find out? I mean, what would success look like, I suppose, for Ethiopia's cotton value chain?
Okay, if I return, I'd like to return and see more in the future, more Ethiopian cotton proceeds domestically, higher yields, better seed system, less dependency on imported fiber, more exports on finished garment instead of raw cottons. I would also like to see stronger regional trade under African free trade market agreement and policy. So success would mean farmers earning more while manufacturers buy more Ethiopian cotton. That would benefit the entire value chain. I would like to revisit our case story. Joseph has his income increased? Are factories buying more Ethiopian cotton? Are imports declining? Has African Free Trade Area Agreement or policy opened new regional markets? And has Ethiopia moved from exporting raw cotton toward exporting more finished garments? That would be success, I think.
A lot of journalists really avoid or shy away from reporting on complex sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and trade because they can feel overwhelming, actually. But what advice would you give to reporters who want to tell these kinds of stories in a way that is accurate and engaging and human?
Yeah, I think my advice on for the journalists to the journalists, don't be intimidated by technical subjects. Every economic story is ultimately about people. Start with one person, follow their journey, ask simple questions, read before interviewing, research, talk to everyone. Never assume government, business, or researcher are telling the whole story. The truth usually lies where those perspectives intersect. Never be intimidated by economics. Everything become understandable when we journalists ask who, why, how, like the ABC of journalism, follow people, not documents, because journalism is born from human curiosity. So human needs to know everything. So policy become interesting when you show how it changes someone's daily life. So I really follow this kind of story and advices for them.
Ayele, thank you so much for taking us behind the story. I think your story reminds us that industrialization isn't built by factories alone, but that it depends on the farmers, the scientists, the manufacturers, the policymakers, and the entrepreneurs working together actually across the entire value chain. It's a powerful example of Bird Story Agency's commitment, I think, to telling stories that highlight Africa's innovation, progress, and opportunity through rigorous on-the-ground journalism. You can read Can Ethiopia Weave Africa's Complete Cotton to Clothing Value Chain on the Bird Story Agency website. If you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Story, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join us next time as we explore the reporting behind another story from across Africa.